Something terrifying lives beneath the sand dunes of Nevada. The town of Crestfall, Nevada existed in a precarious balance with the desert that surrounded it. Like a small island in a golden sea, it sat on the edge of what locals called the shifting sea. Miles of sand dunes that changed shape with each passing season, their crests rising and falling like frozen waves. The morning sun cast long shadows across these dunes, creating patterns that resembled half-buried skeletons. Professor Vivian Ortiz stepped out of her dusty rental car, squinting against the harsh glare. At 42, she had spent nearly half her life studying geological anomalies, but the readings from this region defied explanation. Unusual seismic activity beneath stable sand formations wasn't just rare, it was theoretically impossible. She checked her equipment one last time before heading to the sheriff's office. The portable seismograph had been recording all night, and the patterns it showed made her brow furrow. Not earthquake tremors, not mining activity, not anything she recognized. The vibrations came in regular intervals, almost rhythmic, like something breathing. Sheriff Raymond Cole met her at the station's entrance, his weathered face grave beneath the brim of his hat. At 55, Cole had the demeanor of a man who had seen too much, but talked about too little. His handshake was firm, his eyes evaluating. "Professor, we've got another problem that might interest you," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. 3 tourists went missing 2 days ago. Photography students from UNLV set up camp in the dunes for a night shoot. Vivian followed him to his Bronco. "Any signs of what happened?" "That's why I called you. Their camp was intact, equipment, food, vehicles all there. But the people vanished, and where they should have been." He paused, turning the ignition. "Well, you should see for yourself." 20 minutes later, they stood at the edge of a police perimeter. The students' campsite looked eerily undisturbed. 3 cameras on tripods still pointed at the dunes, capturing nothing but sand. What caught Vivian's attention, however, were the 3 perfect funnel-shaped depressions nearby, each about 15 feet in diameter. "These weren't made by wind," she said, kneeling beside one. "The sand's angle was too precise, the edges too clean, and they're too symmetrical for a collapse. Like something pulled them down," Cole said quietly. Vivian ran her fingers through the sand. It felt normal, but her instruments detected trace elements she couldn't immediately identify. She collected samples in small vials, labeling each carefully. "The dunes have taken people before," came a raspy voice behind them. They turned to see an elderly man approaching, his gait slow but deliberate. Despite the heat, he wore a flannel shirt buttoned to the neck. His skin resembled the desert itself, parched, cracked, enduring. "Jack Harrison," Sheriff Cole explained. "His family's been here since before Crestfall was founded." The old man nodded at Vivian with suspicious eyes. "You're here about the tremors. Wasted trip. Nothing you can measure will explain what's happening." Vivian straightened. "Mr. Harrison, I'm just collecting data." "The shifting sea breathes when no one's watching," he interrupted. "Been doing it for centuries. My grandfather showed me how to listen for it. The hungry sands, he called it." He gestured toward the depressions. "These kids weren't the first. Won't be the last either." Cole sighed. "Jack, we've talked about scaring tourists with those stories. Not stories if they're true, Raymond. Your daddy knew it too. Harrison fixed his gaze on Vivian. You dig too deep, you'll wake it up. Some things should stay buried. After Harrison shuffled away, Cole apologized. Every small town has its superstitions. No need to apologize, Vivian replied, watching the old man's retreating figure. Folktales often contain kernels of truth. The question is, what truth is he circling around? That evening, Vivian set up monitoring equipment at 3 points around the dune system. The sunset painted the sand crimson, as if the desert had soaked up blood. In the distance, the town's lights flickered on one by one, fragile stars against the encroaching darkness. Her laptop displayed the seismic readings in real time. Nothing unusual at first, just the normal vibrations of the earth. Then, as darkness fully descended, the pattern changed. Gentle undulations appeared on the screen, too regular to be random. 5 seconds of activity, then 12 seconds of nothing. Again and again. Impossible, she whispered, checking for equipment malfunctions. Finding none, she overlaid the readings from all 3 monitoring stations. The pattern converged to reveal what appeared to be a network of hollow chambers beneath the dunes, spanning miles. And within these chambers, movement, systematic, coordinated movement. Vivian sat motionless, staring at the screen. Sand dunes didn't have hollow chambers. They certainly didn't have anything moving inside them. Yet her instruments insisted otherwise. A gust of wind scattered sand across her equipment. She brushed it away, then paused. The sand near her feet was moving slightly, differently than wind would cause. As she watched, it began forming a tiny, perfect funnel, spiraling downward like water down a drain. Vivian stepped back, heart pounding. The funnel collapsed immediately, leaving no trace of its existence. Had she imagined it? She looked toward the distant dunes, their silhouettes black against the star-filled sky. For a moment, the entire dune system seemed to shift slightly, like the gentle rise of a sleeping giant's chest. The movement was so subtle, she doubted her own perception. But her equipment didn't lie. Something was moving beneath the sand, something vast and coordinated. And if Jack Harrison was right, something that hungered. Vivian packed her equipment with trembling hands. Scientific curiosity warred with a primal instinct to flee. The dunes stretched before her, innocent and deadly in the moonlight. Golden graves, waiting to be filled. Dawn broke over Crestfall with the harsh clarity unique to desert mornings. Vivian hadn't slept. The movement in the sand had replayed in her mind throughout the night, defying rational explanation. She'd checked her equipment 3 times, calibrated every sensor, and still the data remained. Something beneath the dunes was moving in patterns too deliberate to be geological. By 7 a.m., she was back at the dunes with a core sampling kit. The sun beat down mercilessly as she selected locations based on her seismic readings. Each core sample would provide a vertical slice of the dune's composition, potentially revealing what lay beneath the surface. The first 2 samples showed nothing unusual, just layers of sand and minerals deposited over centuries. The third sample, however, taken from near one of the funnel depressions, contained something that made her pulse quicken. Examining it under her portable microscope, Vivian observed what appeared to be microscopic organisms, unlike anything in her geological experience. They were translucent, with crystalline structures that resembled silicon more than carbon. Dormant, perhaps, or preserved. She couldn't tell. She transferred some to a sealed container for further analysis. Find anything interesting? Sheriff Cole's voice startled her. He approached across the sand, his uniform already darkened with sweat, despite the early hour. Possibly. She hesitated to share her findings until she was more certain. I've never seen this kind of microorganism in sand before. Could be nothing. Cole nodded, though his expression suggested he doubted it was nothing. 2 more missing persons reports came in this morning. Couple camping at the north edge of the dunes. Their RV is still there, doors locked from inside. Vivian felt a chill despite the heat. I'd like to see the location. At the couple's abandoned RV, Vivian found more of the funnel depressions, smaller than those at the student's site, but identical in formation. While Cole examined the vehicle, Vivian collected more samples, including sand from inside the depressions. Back at her motel room, converted into a makeshift lab, she examined the new samples under her microscope. The organisms were present in higher concentrations in the funnel sand. As she adjusted the focus, her assistant Miguel accidentally knocked over a tray, cutting his palm on a broken glass slide. "Damn it," he muttered, blood dripping onto the counter. "Pressure and elevation," Vivian instructed, reaching for the first aid kit. As she turned back, she froze. A drop of Miguel's blood had landed on one of the open sand samples. Under the microscope's harsh light, the dormant organisms had awakened. They moved toward the blood with purpose, surrounding it, absorbing it. As she watched in horror, they multiplied exponentially, transforming the blood into more of themselves. "Miguel, don't touch anything else. Clean that cut and bandage it tight." Her voice remained calm while her mind raced through implications. The organisms weren't just feeding on blood. They were converting it, using its components to replicate themselves. That night, the wind picked up. By morning, Crestfall found itself in the grip of an unprecedented sandstorm. Visibility dropped to near zero as residents shuttered windows and huddled inside. The storm howled like a living thing, its voice occasionally dropping to a low-frequency humming that vibrated through the town's foundations. For 3 days, the storm raged. In her motel room, Vivian continued her analysis, discovering that the organisms reacted not just to blood, but to any organic material. They consumed it, transformed it, multiplied. Most disturbing was their collective behavior. They moved in coordinated patterns, like cells in a larger organism, rather than individual entities. When the storm finally abated on the 4th day, Crestfall emerged to a transformed landscape. The dunes had migrated, creeping closer to town, swallowing the outlying properties. The McAllister farm, half a mile from the previous dune boundary, now had sand up to its porch steps. "The sand looks different," Miguel observed as they surveyed the damage. He was right. The dunes seemed darker, the sand more cohesive. When Vivian knelt to examine it, she felt a subtle vibration, like standing on the chest of a sleeping giant. Sheriff Cole drove up, his vehicle caked with dust. "We've got problems. The Rogers place is gone, completely buried. No sign of the family. And I've had 6 reports of missing pets near the dune perimeter." "There's more," Vivian said. "Look at this." She pointed to fresh funnel depressions forming near the edge of town, dozens of them, where before there had been only isolated occurrences. By afternoon, parents began reporting strange behavior from children who had played near the dunes. 8-year-old Lisa Peterson told her mother that the sand follows you when you're not looking. 10-year-old Ben Wallace refused to go outside, insisting he saw the sand breathing through his bedroom window. As twilight approached, residents reported hearing the low-frequency humming again. Not from a storm this time, but from the dunes themselves. Sheriff Cole organized another search party after the disappearance of a mail carrier whose route took him near the dunes. Vivian joined them, bringing her equipment to measure any anomalies. The search party moved cautiously across the altered landscape, the sand shifting too easily beneath their feet. "Over here!" called one of the deputies. They converged on his position to find the mail carrier's bag half buried in sand. Of the carrier himself, there was no sign. As they expanded their search, the ground beneath them changed. The firm-packed sand gave way to a softer, almost fluid consistency. Vivian's instruments detected increasing vibration. "Everyone back!" she shouted, but too late. A massive sinkhole opened where solid ground had been moments before, nearly 20 feet across. 2 deputies scrambled back from the edge as sand cascaded into the darkness below. Vivian activated her seismic sensors, and the readings made her blood run cold. Something was moving beneath them, something enormous, rising toward the surface. The sand around the sinkhole rippled like water, forming concentric rings that expanded outward. "Get back to town now," Sheriff Cole ordered, pulling Vivian away from the edge as more sand collapsed. As they retreated, Vivian glanced back. For just an instant, she thought she saw something glinting beneath the sand. Not minerals or metal, but what looked like an enormous segmented appendage, chitinous, an alien, withdrawing into the depths. That night, the humming sound grew louder. Dogs throughout Crestfall howled in response. Residents reported sand piling inexplicably against doors and windows, as if testing for weaknesses. Children woke screaming from nightmares of being buried alive. In her motel room, Vivian reviewed her findings with growing dread. The microorganisms, the chambers, the movement patterns. They painted a picture too terrifying to fully comprehend. She was no longer studying a geological anomaly. She was witnessing the awakening of something ancient and hungry, something that had lain dormant beneath the dunes for centuries. Outside, the sand continued its slow, inexorable advance toward Crestfall. And deep beneath the surface, something stirred with purpose. Vivian's laptop screen illuminated her face in the pre-dawn darkness, casting harsh shadows that emphasized her exhaustion. She hadn't slept properly in days. The silicon organisms from her samples had continued to exhibit behavior that defied conventional biology. They responded to stimuli as a collective, communicating through some mechanism she couldn't identify. Most disturbingly, they seemed to be evolving hourly, adapting to the lab conditions with impossible speed. A knock at her door broke her concentration. Sheriff Cole stood there, holding a cardboard box filled with dusty folders. "Town records," he explained, setting the box on her desk. "Thought you might find something useful." Vivian rifled through the folders, property deeds, town council minutes, newspaper clippings dating back to Crestfall's founding in 1887. What am I looking for exactly? Patterns. Cole's voice was grim. Crestfall has a history of disappearances. Every generation has its stories about the dunes. I thought it was just desert folklore until now. As Cole left, Vivian noticed sand clinging to his boots. Darker than normal desert sand, with an almost oily sheen. The same sand that was gradually encroaching on the town. She spent the morning reviewing the historical records. A pattern emerged, subtle but undeniable. Every 30 to 40 years, Crestfall experienced a period of unexplained disappearances. The records were vague, attributing the missing to desert mishaps or migration due to harsh conditions. But the timing was too regular to be coincidental. Midday brought Miguel with translations of Spanish expedition journals he'd found in the university archives. The conquistadors had avoided this region, calling it La Tierra que Devora, the devouring ground. Expedition after expedition had vanished, attempting to cross it. Those who survived spoke of sand that moved against the wind, and nights filled with el zumbido, the humming. Vivian cross-referenced these accounts with anthropological studies of local Native American tribes. The Paiute had extensive oral histories about the region, describing it as a place where the earth hungers. They performed rituals at the dune perimeter, leaving offerings to appease what slept beneath. Professor Ortiz? Miguel's voice interrupted her research. You need to see this. He'd compiled satellite imagery of the Crestfall region dating back to the earliest available records in the 1970s. Comparing these with recent images revealed something remarkable. The town's current location wasn't its original position. Over decades, Crestfall had gradually rebuilt itself farther from the dunes, as if retreating from an advancing tide. The town is moving, Vivian whispered, but no one notices because it happens across generations. Her phone rang. Sheriff Cole, his voice tense. Meet me at the old Turner mining operation, north end of town. Found something you should see. The abandoned silver mine lay at Crestfall's northern edge, its entrance half concealed by desert scrub. Sheriff Cole waited beside his vehicle, a powerful flashlight in hand. These tunnels haven't been used since the 1950s, he explained, leading her into the darkness. County was surveying them for potential historical preservation when they found something that didn't make sense. They descended into the cool darkness, their flashlight beams creating ghoulish shadows against the rock walls. The main shaft extended horizontally for several hundred feet before branching into smaller tunnels. Cole led her down a passage that sloped gently downward. This section wasn't on any of the original mining maps, he said. Looks like the miners broke through into something else entirely. The tunnel widened into a cavern, its floor covered with fine sand that seemed out of place so deep underground. Cole's flashlight illuminated what appeared to be the corner of a wooden structure protruding from the sand. Is that? Vivian began. A building, Cole confirmed. There's more. We found fragments of what looks like an entire settlement buried down here. They spent the next hour excavating carefully. The structure was indeed a building, the remains of a small house, its wood preserved by the dry conditions. Inside, they found furniture, cooking utensils, even a child's doll, all in positions suggesting the occupants had never left. "It's like Pompeii," Vivian murmured, "except with sand instead of ash." Further excavation revealed more buildings, the remnants of a town similar in size to present-day Crestfall. Cole found a half-buried sign bearing the faded words, "Silver Wells, established 1852. "Silver Wells," Vivian repeated. "The town that was here before Crestfall." "No record of it in any modern registry," Cole said. "It's as if it was erased from history." As they continued exploring, Vivian's flashlight caught something protruding from the sand, what appeared to be a human hand. But when she knelt to examine it, she recoiled in horror. The hand wasn't flesh, but a grotesque hybrid of human tissue and crystalline material, similar to the silicon organisms in her samples. The transformation appeared to have spread from the fingertips upward, preserving the hand's shape while converting its substance. "Raymond," she called, her voice shaking. "You need to see this." Cole crouched beside her, his face paling. "What the hell is that?" "I think..." Vivian hesitated, the implications too terrible to voice. "I think it's what happens to the people who disappear into the sand." Further digging revealed more partial remains, all exhibiting the same transformation. Some were barely recognizable as human, the silicon conversion nearly complete. In one particularly disturbing specimen, the skull remained partially intact, the silicon material having formed a lattice-like structure through the eye sockets and mouth. "They weren't just killed," Vivian said, examining the remains. "They were converted, transformed into something else." "But why?" Cole asked. "What purpose would that serve?" Before Vivian could answer, a low humming vibration filled the cavern. Sand began to shift around their feet, forming the now familiar funnel patterns. "We need to leave," Cole said urgently. "Now." They retreated up the tunnel as the vibration intensified. Behind them, sand began flowing uphill, defying gravity in its pursuit. Back in town, Vivian compiled her findings into a coherent hypothesis. The silicon organisms weren't simply microbes. They were extensions of a vast colonial entity, something ancient and patient. The chambers beneath the dunes weren't geological formations, but organs of this entity, expanding and contracting like lungs or a circulatory system. Most terrifying was the historical pattern she'd discovered. Crestfall wasn't the first town to exist in this location. Every few generations, a settlement would be established, thrive briefly, then vanish, consumed by the entity beneath the dunes. The current town was merely the latest in this cycle, unaware of its predecessor's fate. As night fell, Vivian presented her findings to Sheriff Cole and Mayor Hayes in the town hall. Their faces grew increasingly grim as she explained what they were facing. "The entity has been dormant, perhaps hibernating," she concluded, "but something has disturbed its sleep cycle. The increased tourism, my drilling. We've accelerated its awakening." "Are you suggesting we evacuate the entire town?" Mayor Hayes asked incredulously. "I'm suggesting we try to understand what we're dealing with before it's too late," Vivian replied. "This entity has consumed entire communities before. It will do so again unless we find a way to stop it." Outside, the humming from the dunes grew louder. Through the town hall windows, they could see the sand advancing, creeping between buildings, like fingers testing for weakness. "It's already started," Sheriff Cole said quietly. In the silence that followed, they heard a noise above the humming. Jack Harrison's voice, chanting words in a language none of them recognized. The old man stood at the edge of town, facing the dunes, arms raised in what appeared to be ritual supplication. "What is he doing?" Mayor Hayes asked. "I think," Vivian said slowly, "he's trying to put it back to sleep." But as they watched, the sand around Harrison began to swirl, rising like a living thing. His chanting faltered, then resumed with greater urgency. For a moment, the advancing sand hesitated. Then it surged forward, enveloping him completely. His chant became a scream, abruptly silenced as he vanished beneath the golden tide. The dunes had claimed their first victim in Crestfall. It would not be the last. Morning brought no relief to Crestfall. Jack Harrison's death had shattered the town's remaining complacency, replacing it with a dread that hung in the air like the desert heat. Mayor Hayes ordered a mandatory evacuation, but the roads leading out of town were already compromised. Sand had rendered the eastern highway impassable overnight, while the western route showed ominous signs of subsidence. Vivian stood in her motel room, organizing her research into what she now understood as a unified theory of horror. The silicon organisms weren't separate entities, but components of something far larger, like cells in a body. The chambers beneath the dunes functioned as organs, and the entity's purpose, based on the transformed remains they'd discovered, appeared to be assimilation rather than simple destruction. Her phone rang. Sheriff Cole's voice was tight with urgency. "Harrison's house. You need to see this. Now." 20 minutes later, Vivian stood in the living room of Jack Harrison's modest home at the edge of town. The house was a museum of obsession, walls covered with maps, charts, and faded photographs spanning generations. A family chronicle of vigilance against an ancient enemy. "His family knew," Cole said, gesturing to a leather-bound journal on the table. "They've been performing rituals for generations, trying to keep this thing dormant." Vivian examined the journal, its pages filled with meticulous observations dating back to the 1890s. The Harrisons had been Crestfall's unwitting guardians, passing their burden from father to son, maintaining a vigil few understood or appreciated. The rituals required blood, she noted, reading further. Animal sacrifices at first, then human. Jack's grandfather wrote that only the blood of the willing could truly satisfy it. "Jesus," Cole muttered. "You think Jack was sacrificing people?" "No," Vivian said, turning to the final entries. "I think when the entity began awakening prematurely, Jack offered himself. He believed his willing sacrifice might put it back to sleep." She closed the journal. He was wrong. They were interrupted by Miguel, who burst through the door with a laptop. "Professor, the seismic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's moving. All of it." On the screen, wave patterns spiked in coordinated sequences across the entire dune system. Not the gentle undulations of before, but violent, sustained activity. "It's fully awake now," Vivian whispered. As if in confirmation, the ground beneath them shuddered. Outside, Car alarms activated in cascading waves across town. Through the windows, they watched as the distant dunes began to shift. Not the subtle movement of wind-blown sand, but the deliberate motion of something vast stirring beneath the surface. "Evacuation has to happen now," Cole said, already moving toward the door. The earthquake, if it could be called that, lasted nearly 3 minutes. When it subsided, Crestfall had changed. Fissures had opened in streets, buildings leaned at precarious angles, and the dunes had transformed entirely. Where before they had been recognizable landforms, they now flowed like viscous liquid, their surfaces rippling in patterns too regular to be natural. In places, the sand parted momentarily, revealing glimpses of something beneath. Enormous segmented structures, chitinous and alien, that withdrew quickly from view. "My God," Miguel breathed, filming the sight on his phone. "It's like the sand is just a disguise." "That's exactly what it is," Vivian confirmed. "A protective covering, like skin. The entity has been using it to hide in plain sight for centuries." As they watched, tendrils of sand began extending from the dune mass, probing toward town like curious fingers. Where they touched, ordinary desert sand darkened, took on the same oily sheen as the transformed dunes. "It's converting the surrounding environment," Vivian observed. "The silicon organisms are spreading." Back at the town hall, chaos reigned. Evacuation efforts had stalled as more roads became impassable. The radio station reported similar phenomena at other desert communities within a 30-mile radius. Sand behaving abnormally, people vanishing, communications failing. Mayor Hayes was on the verge of panic. "The National Guard can't get through. Roads collapse under their vehicles. Helicopters report severe turbulence over the affected areas. 2 nearly crashed." "It's isolating us," Vivian said, "cutting us off before it feeds." Cole organized the remaining deputies into search teams, instructing them to gather as many townspeople as possible at the high school, the furthest building from the advancing dunes. Vivian accompanied him, bringing her equipment to monitor the entity's progress. As they worked, Jack Harrison's journal provided crucial insights. The Harrison family had discovered that the entity operated on a feeding cycle, awakening every 40 years to consume organic matter, then returning to dormancy. But something had disrupted this cycle, triggering premature awakening. "It's the drilling," Cole realized. "The new tourism development at the dunes, your research. We've been poking a sleeping predator with sticks." Vivian nodded grimly. "And now it's hungry and irritated." By nightfall, nearly 300 townspeople had gathered at the high school. Outside, the transformed sand had reached the town's outer buildings, flowing around structures, testing foundations. Where it touched organic material, wood, fabric, vegetation, it began a process of conversion, breaking down the material and absorbing it. Most disturbing were the animals caught in its path. A stray dog, trapped against a chain-link fence, was gradually enveloped. Rather than being pulled under, it remained visible as the silicon organisms flowed over and through it, converting its living tissue. The animal's struggles slowed, then ceased. But its eyes remained open, observing with alien intelligence as its body became a vessel for the entity. "It doesn't just consume," Vivian said, watching through binoculars from the high school roof. "It repurposes. The implications for the missing townspeople were too horrific to voice. As midnight approached, a new development. The National Guard had established a perimeter 10 miles from town and was attempting to reach them with specialized vehicles designed for extreme terrain. The news brought cautious hope to the gathered survivors. That hope died when the first military vehicles approached the town limits. As they advanced over seemingly normal desert terrain, the sand beneath them liquefied without warning. Massive vehicles weighing several tons sank like stones in water, disappearing completely within minutes. The sand then solidified again, showing no evidence of what lay beneath. "It's intelligent," Miguel observed. "It's targeting the rescue effort specifically." "Not just intelligent," Vivian added. "Strategic." The night wore on, the perimeter of transformed sand creeping ever closer to the high school. The humming sound had become constant now, vibrating through the building's foundations. Children covered their ears and wept. Adults prayed or sat in stunned silence. Around 3 a.m., Jack Harrison's journal yielded another revelation, a possible vulnerability. The Harrison family had discovered that certain combinations of chemicals and sound frequencies seemed to distress the entity, causing it to retreat temporarily. The journal contained precise formulas and tonal patterns passed down through generations. Most of these chemicals are common water treatment compounds, Vivian noted, studying the formulas. The town's water plant would have them. "And the frequencies?" Cole asked. "Can be generated with modified sound equipment. Nothing we can't build." For the first time in days, they had the glimmer of a plan. Not for victory, perhaps, but for survival. Dawn brought new horror. The transformed sand had accelerated its advance overnight, reaching buildings barely a block from the high school. And it had grown more aggressive in its assimilation. Where before it had flowed around obstacles, now it moved through them, breaking down structures from within. Most terrifying was the fate of those caught in its path. A family of 4, attempting to reach the high school from their home, was surrounded by flowing sand. Witnesses on the high school roof watched in helpless horror as the sand rose around them, not pulling them under, but flowing over them like a second skin. Their screams cut off as the silicon organisms entered their bodies through every available orifice. They remained standing, 4 human-shaped figures now composed of the same dark sand as the dunes, before walking stiffly back toward the main dune mass. "It's building an army," someone whispered. Inside the high school, Vivian and Cole worked frantically with volunteers to implement their plan. The water treatment chemicals had been retrieved in a dangerous pre-dawn mission. Sound equipment from the school's music department was being modified according to Harrison's specifications. As they worked, the transformed sand reached the high school grounds. It flowed across the parking lot, rising against the building's walls, probing windows and doors for entry points. And deep beneath the dunes, something massive shifted, preparing to reveal itself fully to the world it had hidden from for centuries. The awakening was complete. The feeding was about to begin. The high school's windows had been barricaded with desks and filing cabinets, but nothing could truly keep out what waited outside. The transformed sand, now a living extension of the entity beneath the dunes, found microscopic entry points seeping through the smallest cracks. infiltrating the building grain by grain. Vivian first noticed it collecting in corners, gathering like dust, but moving with purpose. She alerted Sheriff Cole, who organized teams to sweep it out, but the effort was futile. The sand would retreat, then reappear elsewhere, patient and persistent. "We need to accelerate the plan," Vivian told Cole as they monitored the building's perimeter. "We don't have much time." In the chemistry lab, Miguel supervised volunteers mixing the compounds from Harrison's journal. Precise combinations of chlorine, aluminum sulfate, sodium benzoate, and other water treatment chemicals. The formula wasn't designed to kill the entity, but to repel it, creating a temporary safe zone. "It's like making the most aggressive antimicrobial ever created," Miguel explained, carefully measuring powders on a digital scale. "But we have no idea if it will work on something this large." Meanwhile, the school's band director had jury-rigged sound equipment to generate the specific frequencies Harrison had documented. "It's in the infrasound range," she explained, adjusting settings on a modified synthesizer. "Below human hearing threshold, but according to these notes, it disrupts the entity's communication network." Outside, the situation deteriorated hourly. The sand had completely encircled the school, rising against the walls like a tide. Occasionally, shapes formed in its surface, impressions of hands, faces, torsos, as if whatever had once been human was trying to emerge, only to dissolve back into the mass. Most disturbing were the transformed townspeople who now patrolled the perimeter. Once ordinary citizens of Crestfall, they had become extensions of the entity, human-shaped figures composed entirely of the dark, oily sand. They moved with unnatural coordination, testing the building's defenses, searching for weaknesses. Their faces retained just enough human features to be recognizable to friends and family trapped inside, adding psychological horror to physical threat. "Don't look at them," Vivian advised the volunteers. "They're not your neighbors anymore. They're probes, sensors for the main entity." A teenage girl collapsed sobbing after recognizing her father among the sand constructs. His form pressed against a window, hand outstretched in a grotesque parody of connection, before dissolving back into formless sand. By mid-afternoon, the chemical compounds were ready. Teams equipped with modified garden sprayers prepared to create a perimeter of treated ground around the most vulnerable entry points. The sound equipment, meanwhile, had been positioned throughout the building, ready to broadcast the disruptive frequencies. "We activate both simultaneously," Vivian instructed. "The chemicals create a barrier the silicon organisms can't cross. The sound prevents them from coordinating an effective response." Sheriff Cole checked his watch. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Now." The band director activated the sound system. Though the frequencies were largely inaudible to human ears, their effect was immediately apparent. The sand constructs outside shuddered, their forms losing cohesion. The flowing sand at the building's foundations retreated several feet, as if in pain. Simultaneously, teams began spraying the chemical compound in wide arcs around doors and windows. Where the liquid touch transformed sand, it created an immediate reaction. The sand hissed and steamed, reverting to ordinary silica, lifeless and inert. "It's working," Miguel called from his observation point. The victory was short-lived. Within minutes, the entity adapted. The sand constructs reformed, their movements more deliberate. They began gathering ordinary objects, rocks, branches, pieces of metal from abandoned vehicles, and using them as tools to scrape away the chemical barrier. "It's learning," Vivian observed with horrified fascination. "Problem-solving in real time." More alarmingly, the sound frequencies became less effective as minutes passed. The entity appeared to be adjusting, finding ways to maintain communication despite the disruption. "We need something stronger," Vivian told Cole. "This is just buying time." A commotion at the east entrance interrupted them. A sand construct had breached the barrier, flowing through a doorway before solidifying into a vaguely human shape. 2 deputies confronted it, firing their weapons in panic. The bullets passed through harmlessly, the holes closing instantly. The construct lunged forward with impossible speed, engulfing one deputy before anyone could react. The man's screams became muffled as the sand flowed over and into him. Within seconds, where 2 men had stood, there were now 2 constructs. The newer one still wearing the deputy's uniform, its face a featureless mask of sand. "Fall back!" Cole shouted, emptying his magazine into the advancing constructs. Like the earlier shots, these had no effect. Miguel arrived with a fire extinguisher filled with the chemical compound. He doused both constructs, which dissolved into inert piles of ordinary sand. The deputy's body collapsed alongside them, desiccated and brittle, as if decades dead. "The compound works on direct contact," Miguel noted grimly, "but we don't have enough to coat the entire building." In the hours that followed, similar breaches occurred at multiple points. Each was repelled, but at a cost: dwindling chemical supplies and growing fatigue among the defenders. By sunset, they had retreated to the central gymnasium, abandoning the outer rooms to the encroaching sand. The gym's hardwood floor provided temporarily better protection, fewer cracks, fewer entry points. But sand was accumulating along the walls, forming small, purposeful dunes that grew hourly. Night brought new horrors. The humming from outside intensified until the building vibrated with it. Children huddled in the center of the gym, hands over ears, while adults maintained a constant vigil along the perimeter. Around midnight, the gym's lights flickered and died. Emergency generators kicked in, providing minimal illumination. In the dimness, shadows seemed to move independently, sand shifting in ways invisible in brighter light. "They're testing for weaknesses," Vivian observed, watching tiny tendrils of sand probing between floorboards. Mayor Hayes, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the crisis, finally broke. "We're going to die here, aren't we? It's just a matter of time." "No," Vivian said firmly. "We've been playing defense. Now we need to attack." She gathered Cole, Miguel, and several volunteers around a makeshift table where she'd spread Harrison's journal and her own notes. The chemical compound works because it disrupts the silicon organism's ability to communicate and coordinate, but it's just a temporary solution. "So what's permanent?" Cole asked. "Water," Vivian said. "Not ordinary water. Saline water with specific mineral content. Harrison's family discovered it decades ago. The silicon organisms dissolve completely in it, unable to maintain their structure or reproduce." "Like the Great Salt Lake," Miguel realized. "That's why the entity is confined to Nevada. It can't cross the salt flats to reach Utah." Vivian nodded. "Exactly." And there's an underground aquifer beneath Crestfall with exactly the right saline content. Harrison's journal includes maps from the old mining operation. If we could breach the aquifer at the right point, we could flood the chambers beneath the dunes. Cole finished. Drown this thing before it consumes the entire town. Hope flickered in the room for the first time in days. But practical obstacles remained formidable. The breach point is here, Vivian indicated on the map, beneath the central dune mass. We'd need to get through nearly a mile of entity-controlled territory, carrying explosives powerful enough to crack bedrock. The mining company, Mayor Hayes suggested. They left equipment behind when they shut down operations, including blasting materials. If they're still there. I can check, Cole volunteered, but getting through that sand alive. Miguel had been examining the chemical formula. We could modify this, create a more concentrated version that doesn't just repel, but actively destroys the silicon organisms. Use it to clear a path. That could work, Vivian agreed, but we'd need more chemicals than we have here. Mayor Hayes straightened. The water treatment plant has everything on your list. It's closer than the mining operation, only 3 blocks from here. 3 blocks through hungry sand, Cole said grimly, but it's our best chance. As they formulated the plan, the sand continued its inexorable invasion of the gymnasium. Tiny rivulets flowed between floorboards, converging in the corners, gathering mass and purpose. The entity was patient but persistent. It had waited centuries to feed. It could wait hours more for these final morsels. Outside, the transformed dunes pulsed with life, their surface rippling with coordinated patterns, visible even in the darkness, and deep beneath, in chambers that had been expanding for millennia, the central mass of the entity stirred with anticipation, ready to emerge fully into a world it intended to remake in its own crystalline image. Dawn broke over a transformed Crestfall. From the high school roof, the survivors could see that the town no longer existed as they had known it. Buildings stood half-buried in the living sand, their structures already being broken down and absorbed. The dunes had expanded to encompass everything within a mile radius, their surface undulating with sickening rhythm. Most disturbing were the constructs, dozens now, perhaps hundreds, that moved with purpose through the altered landscape. Former neighbors and friends transformed into extensions of the entity, their humanity reduced to approximate shape and lingering fragments of identity. Inside the gymnasium, Vivian finalized the plan with Cole and a team of volunteers. The chemical formula had been modified as Miguel suggested, creating a more aggressive compound that would actively destroy the silicon organisms on contact. Meanwhile, Cole had assembled makeshift protective gear, plastic sheeting, duct tape, swimming goggles, anything to prevent direct contact with the transformed sand. The water treatment plant is 3 blocks east, Mayor Hayes explained, pointing to a map of the town. The main chemical storage is in the basement. Everything you need should be there. And the mining operation? Vivian asked. 2 miles north. The explosives were kept in a reinforced bunker, separate from the main facility. If they're still there after all these years? They will be, Cole said with forced confidence. Mining explosives are stable for decades if stored properly. The plan was set. One team would retrieve additional chemicals from the water treatment plant, allowing Miguel to create enough of the enhanced formula to clear a path to the mining operation. A second team would then secure the explosives and proceed to the breach point beneath the central dune mass. "I'll lead the first team," Cole volunteered. "And I'll take the second," Vivian said. "I know what we're looking for beneath the dunes." Miguel cleared his throat. "I should go with the first team. I need to identify the right chemicals." The volunteers were a cross-section of Crestfall's population: a retired military engineer, a high school science teacher, a construction foreman, ordinary people facing extraordinary horror with remarkable courage. Preparations took most of the morning. The protective gear was crude but thorough. Every inch of skin covered, every seam sealed. Each team member carried sprayers filled with the remaining chemical compound, the last line of defense against the hungry sand. "Stay together," Cole instructed as they prepared to leave. "Move quickly but carefully, and if someone gets taken—" He paused, meeting each volunteer's eyes. "Don't try to save them. Just complete the mission." They exited through the gymnasium's emergency doors into blinding sunlight and oppressive heat. The school grounds had become an alien landscape, the ordinary desert sand replaced by the darker, semi-liquid extension of the entity. It retreated momentarily as they sprayed their chemical compound, creating a narrow path forward. The journey to the water treatment plant was a nightmare of vigilance and precision. Every step had to be carefully placed on treated ground. The sand around them reached upward like hungry tendrils, testing the boundaries of their chemical barrier. Construct figures watched from a distance, tracking their progress with eyeless faces. 2 blocks from the high school, the first attack came. A construct emerged suddenly from between abandoned vehicles, lunging at the rear of their formation. The volunteer at the back, a woman named Rita, who had once run the local diner, had no time to use her sprayer. The sand enveloped her legs, flowing upward with terrible speed. Cole turned back, emptying his sprayer at the construct, which retreated momentarily. But the damage was done. Rita's lower body had already begun transforming, the silicon organisms converting her tissue with horrific efficiency. "Go!" she screamed, her voice still human, though her body was rapidly becoming something else. "Don't waste the compound." They had no choice but to continue, leaving her behind. Her screams faded, replaced by the omnipresent humming that emanated from the dunes. The water treatment plant appeared intact, though sand had accumulated against its walls and windows. They entered through a maintenance door, sealing it behind them with the last of their chemical barrier. Inside, the air was stale but clean, free of the transformed sand. They moved quickly to the basement chemical storage, where Miguel identified the compounds they needed. Industrial quantities of the same materials they'd been using in diluted form. "We can make gallons of the enhanced formula with this," he said, filling backpacks with containers of powders and liquids. Enough to clear a path all the way to the mining operation and back. Their return journey was faster, but no less tense. The chemical barrier they'd created on the way in had already begun to degrade, the entity learning to neutralize it more quickly. They used the last of their compounds sparingly, conserving enough to reach the high school safely. Once inside, Miguel immediately began producing the enhanced formula, working with the efficiency of desperation. By late afternoon, they had enough for the second phase of the plan. Vivian prepared her team while Cole recovered from the first expedition. The new compound had been tested on sand samples collected from the gym floor, proving dramatically effective. The silicon organisms not only became inert, but disintegrated completely, reverting to ordinary silica. "The mining explosives are our priority," Vivian reminded her team. "Without them, we have no way to breach the aquifer." As twilight approached, they were ready. 6 people, including Vivian, each carrying sprayers of the enhanced compound and wearing the best protective gear they could improvise. Cole would remain behind, organizing the remaining survivors for possible evacuation if the plan failed. 2 hours, Vivian told him at the door. "If we're not back by then, get these people as far away as possible." Cole nodded grimly. "Good luck." The enhanced compound proved significantly more effective, creating wider clearings in the transformed sand. The entity seemed to recognize the increased threat, the sand retreating more dramatically from the spray. Construct figures kept their distance, observing but not approaching. They reached the mining operation without direct confrontation. The main facility was half submerged in sand, but the explosives bunker remained accessible, its reinforced concrete having resisted the entity's attempts at absorption. Inside, they found what they needed: industrial mining explosives, old but stable, designed to fracture bedrock for excavation. They gathered as much as they could carry, along with detonators and timers. "Now for the hard part," Vivian said, consulting Harrison's journal and her maps. "The breach point is beneath the central dune mass. We need to get into the tunnel system." The tunnel entrance was barely visible, nearly covered by the transformed sand. They cleared it with the compound, revealing a dark passage leading downward into the earth. The air that escaped was stale and carried the same humming vibration that permeated the surface, amplified by the tunnel's acoustics. "Stay close," Vivian instructed as they entered, flashlights creating dancing shadows on the rock walls. The tunnels branch throughout this area. It's easy to get lost. The descent was claustrophobic and disorienting. The tunnels seemed to shift and change, not physically but perceptually, as if the very space around them was being manipulated. The humming grew louder, becoming almost palpable, a pressure against their eardrums and skin. "It's trying to disorient us," Vivian realized. "Some kind of psychic effect." They relied on her maps and compass, ignoring sensory impressions that suggested they were moving in circles or heading in the wrong direction. The entity's influence grew stronger the deeper they went, manifesting as whispers just beyond the range of comprehension, flickers of movement in peripheral vision, and an increasing sense of being watched from all sides. An hour into their descent, they encountered the first hybrid. Unlike the constructs on the surface, which were essentially sand sculptures mimicking human form, this creature retained more organic components. A man, or what had once been a man, his body partially transformed by the silicon organisms. Crystalline structures protruded from his skin, which had taken on the texture and color of the transformed sand. His eyes were gone, replaced by gleaming mineral deposits that somehow still conveyed awareness. Most horrifying was his ability to speak. his voice a rasping whisper that seemed to emanate not from his throat, but from the crystalline structures throughout his body. "You should not be here," he said, blocking their path. "This is becoming place. Changing place." "Who are you?" Vivian asked, her sprayer raised defensively. "Was Carl Winters, mining supervisor. Now, I'm becoming. We all becoming." He gestured behind him, where other hybrid figures had emerged from side tunnels, men and women in various stages of transformation, some barely recognizable as human, others still possessing facial features that triggered recognition in the team members. "My sister," one volunteer whispered, recognizing a hybrid that had been missing for weeks. "Oh God, Andrea." The hybrid that had been Andrea tilted her head, crystalline eyes gleaming in the flashlight beams. "Better this way," she said, her voice like stones grinding together. "Join. Become more." "What do you want?" Vivian demanded, addressing the group of hybrids. "To show," the Carl hybrid replied. "Great becoming, beautiful transformation." The tunnel around them seemed to pulse, the humming intensifying. Images flashed in their minds, visions of a world transformed, humans and silicon organisms merged into a new form of life that was neither yet both. In this vision, the entity wasn't a predator, but a catalyst, transforming rather than destroying. "It's trying to convert us," Vivian warned the team. "Psychically, before it does. So physically. Don't listen." But one team member, a young man named Paul, lowered his sprayer, his expression becoming slack with wonder. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Can't you see? It's the next step in evolution." Before anyone could stop him, he stepped toward the hybrids. They embraced him with crystalline arms, the silicon organisms flowing from their bodies onto his, beginning the transformation process. His expression remained rapturous even as the crystal structures erupted from his skin. "Run!" Vivian shouted, using her sprayer to clear a path past the hybrids. The enhanced compound worked on them as it had on the sand, dissolving the silicon components and leaving only withered human remains that collapsed like empty husks. They fled deeper into the tunnel system, the surviving hybrids in pursuit. The visions intensified. Seductive images of power, immortality, transcendence through transformation. Each team member fought their own psychological battle against the entity's influence. Finally, they reached their destination, a vast underground chamber that had once been part of the mining operation, but now served as one of the entity's primary organs. The space was enormous, cathedral-like, its walls lined with pulsating crystalline structures that emitted the same humming vibration they'd felt throughout. In the center of the chamber rose the neural core of the entity, a massive, writhing mass of silicon organisms arranged in complex, ever-changing patterns that mimicked the architecture of a brain. Around it, thousands of cocoon-like structures hung from the ceiling and walls, each containing a partially transformed human. Missing persons from Crestfall and earlier settlements, suspended in various stages of becoming something no longer human. There. Vivian pointed to where the chamber's floor met the far wall. That's the aquifer boundary. If we place the explosives there, the water will flood this entire chamber system. As they moved forward, the psychic assault intensified. The entity had recognized their intent, and was fighting back with its most powerful weapon, the ability to invade and manipulate human consciousness. Team members stumbled, clutching their heads as the visions became overwhelming. Another volunteer succumbed, dropping his pack of explosives and walking trance-like toward the neural core. The silicon organisms reached out to welcome him, engulfing him in a crystalline embrace as his body began to transform. Vivian and the two remaining team members fought through the psychic fog, focusing on their mission with single-minded determination. They reached the aquifer boundary, a section of wall where moisture seeped through in small rivulets, promising the vast reservoir of saline water beyond. As they prepared the explosives, hybrid figures converged from all directions, closing in with the inexorable patience of creatures that no longer experienced time as humans did. The team worked frantically, placing charges at precise intervals along the boundary wall, setting timers for 15 minutes, just enough time to reach the surface if they moved quickly. "Ready," Vivian announced as she armed the final detonator. "Let's move." They turned to find their retreat cut off by dozens of hybrids, their crystalline bodies forming a living barrier. Behind them, the neural core pulsed with malevolent intelligence, directing its extensions to prevent the humans' escape. The chamber had become a trap, and as the explosive timers counted down, Vivian realized with cold clarity that their mission had just become a suicide run. 14 minutes and 30 seconds. The digital timers on the explosives counted down with merciless precision as Vivian assessed their situation. The chamber exit remained blocked by hybrid figures whose humanity had been subsumed by the entity. Behind them, the neural core pulsed with alien intelligence, directing its extensions with cold purpose. "We need to clear a path," Vivian told her two remaining team members, Jason, the retired military engineer, and Diane, the high school science teacher. Both looked exhausted, their faces drawn with the strain of resisting the entity's psychic assault. "Almost out of compound," Jason reported, checking his sprayer. Diane nodded grimly. "Same here. Maybe enough for one more push." 13 minutes, 45 seconds. "We concentrate what we have on a single point," Vivian decided. "Create a narrow corridor and run like hell." They combined the remaining chemical compound into a single sprayer. The hybrids seemed to sense their intent, closing ranks to form an even more impenetrable barrier. The crystalline structures protruding from their bodies interlocked, creating a living wall. "There," Vivian pointed to a slightly thinner section of the hybrid barrier. "That's our target." 13 minutes even. Jason took the sprayer, his military training evident in his precise movements. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, now." He unleashed the concentrated compound in a powerful stream. Where it struck the hybrids, their silicon components dissolved instantly, the crystalline structures collapsing into inert dust. Human remains fell like discarded puppets, creating a narrow gap in the living wall. "Go!" Jason shouted, continuing to spray as Vivian and Diane rushed forward. They broke through the gap, emerging into the tunnel beyond. But Jason didn't follow. The sprayer had emptied, and the hybrids were already closing around him, their crystalline appendages enveloping his protective suit. "Keep going," he called after them. "Complete the mission." Vivian hesitated, but Diane pulled her forward. "We can't help him now. The timers are still running." 12 minutes, 20 seconds. They fled through the tunnels, retracing their path by memory. The entity's psychic pressure intensified, filling their minds with disorienting visions and false sensory input. Tunnels seemed to shift and branch where they hadn't before. Gravity itself felt inconsistent, as if the very laws of physics were being manipulated to confuse them. "Stay focused," Vivian gasped as they ran. "It's trying to make us lose our way." 10 minutes, 45 seconds. Behind them, the hybrid pursuers had regrouped. They moved with unhurried confidence, as if certain their prey couldn't escape. Perhaps they could sense the timers counting down, knew the humans were trapped in a dying system. The tunnel began to slope upward. They were nearing the surface. But as they rounded a corner, they found the passage blocked by a wall of transformed sand, flowing and churning with malevolent purpose. "Back!" Diane cried. "Find another way." 9 minutes, 10 seconds. They retreated, taking a side passage that seemed to angle upward. The hybrid pursuers were closer now, their crystalline bodies gleaming in the beam of Vivian's failing flashlight. The passage narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file, then widened again into a chamber Vivian didn't recognize. "We've taken a wrong turn," she realized with horror. The chamber contained what appeared to be a processing center. Cocoon-like structures hung from the ceiling, each containing a human in various stages of transformation. The floor was covered with the shimmering, oily sand that marked the entity's presence. 8 minutes, 30 seconds. "There!" Diane pointed to another tunnel entrance on the far side of the chamber. "That has to lead up." They skirted the edge of the chamber, avoiding the sand as much as possible. Halfway across, Diane's foot slipped, contacting the transformed sand directly. She screamed as it flowed instantly up her leg, the silicon organisms beginning their conversion process even through her protective gear. "Go," she told Vivian, already struggling to free herself as the sand pulled her downward. "I'll hold them off." 7 minutes, 55 seconds. Vivian reached for her, but Diane pushed her away. "The people upstairs are counting on you. Go." With a final agonized look back, Vivian ran for the tunnel. Behind her, Diane used her body to block the hybrid pursuers, buying precious seconds with her sacrifice. The new tunnel did indeed lead upward, spiraling toward the surface. Vivian's lungs burned as she ran, her body pushed beyond normal endurance by desperation and adrenaline. 6 minutes, 20 seconds. She emerged into blinding daylight, the surface world momentarily disorienting after the darkness below. The mining facility lay before her, half submerged in the transformed sand. In the distance, the high school stood as an island in the golden sea, surrounded but not yet consumed. The sand around her feet began to move with purpose, reaching for her like hungry fingers. Without the chemical compound to protect her, she had only speed as a defense. She ran, leaping from one patch of normal ground to another, avoiding the transformed sand as much as possible. 5 minutes. The desert itself seemed to be pursuing her now. The dunes shifted and flowed, faster than natural sand could move, converging to cut off her escape route. Construct figures emerged from the flowing mass, human-shaped but composed, entirely of the entity's substance. 4 minutes, 15 seconds. Vivian changed direction, heading for higher ground, a rocky outcropping that the sand hadn't yet reached. From there, she could see that the entity was fully awakened now. The entire dune system had become a single organism, its surface undulating with coordinated patterns. In places, the sand parted to reveal glimpses of chitinous structures beneath, enormous appendages and organs that had been hidden for centuries. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. From her elevated position, Vivian could also see something else, a vehicle approaching from the direction of the high school. Sheriff Cole's Bronco, moving at dangerous speed across the unstable terrain, sand spraying in its wake. He pulled up at the base of the outcropping. "Get in!" he shouted through the open window. Vivian scrambled down and flung herself into the passenger seat. The explosives are set. Less than 4 minutes. Cole spun the vehicle around, accelerating back toward the high school. Everyone's loaded on school buses. They're heading for the county line. "Will they make it?" Vivian asked, watching the countdown on her watch. "If we're lucky, if this works." 2 minutes, 30 seconds. The Bronco bounced violently as Cole pushed it to its limits. The transformed sand seemed to recognize the threat they posed. It reached up in waves, trying to engulf the speeding vehicle. The engine roared as Cole swerved to avoid the grasping tendrils, tires spinning on the treacherous surface. "It knows," Vivian said. "It's trying to stop us." 2 minutes. A massive sand wave rose before them, cutting off the direct route to the high school. Cole cursed and changed direction, taking a wider path around the dune system. The detour would cost precious time, but there was no alternative. Behind them, the central dune mass had begun to change. The sand was withdrawing, revealing more of the entity's true form, a colossal, chitinous structure resembling nothing Earth had evolved naturally. Like an insect the size of a small mountain, its segmented body breaking the surface after centuries beneath it. 1 minute, 15 seconds. "We're not going to make it to the buses," Cole realized, eyeing the countdown on Vivian's watch. "High ground," she suggested. "We need to get above whatever's coming." Cole nodded, steering toward another rocky outcropping that rose from the desert floor. An island of stone in the sea of sand. They abandoned the Bronco at its base, scrambling up the rough surface as quickly as they could. 45 seconds. From their elevated position, they could see the full extent of the entity's emergence. The sand had pulled back entirely from its central mass, revealing a nightmare of alien biology, a creature that was both insect and crystalline formation, organic and mineral simultaneously. Its surface gleamed with silicon structures identical to those they'd seen in the hybrids, but on a massive scale. "My God," Cole whispered. "It's beautiful, in a horrible way." 30 seconds. The entity seemed to sense the impending threat. Its emergence halted, the massive form beginning to withdraw back beneath the surface. But it was too late. The explosives were too deep, too close to its neural core. 20 seconds. "Cover your ears," Vivian advised, though she knew it would make little difference. 10 seconds. The desert fell suddenly, eerily silent. Even the omnipresent humming ceased, as if the entity was holding its breath. 0. The explosion wasn't immediately visible, but its effects were. The Earth shuddered with seismic force, the shockwave radiating outward from the central dune mass. Then the ground began to collapse, not in a single dramatic movement, but in a series of sinkhole formations that spread across the dune system like a chain reaction. Water followed. Not the trickle they'd seen in the chamber below, but a torrent. The aquifer had been breached catastrophically, releasing a flood into the chamber system beneath the dunes. Where the water touched the transformed sand, it dissolved instantly, reverting to ordinary silica. The entity's reaction was immediate and terrible. A sound unlike anything Vivian had ever heard. Not quite a scream, but a frequency that vibrated through bone and tissue, erupted from the central mass. The enormous chitinous body thrashed in agony as the saline water reached its neural core, dissolving the silicon organisms that composed its consciousness. "It's working," Cole said in wonder as they watched from their rocky sanctuary. The sinkhole formation spread, encompassing larger and larger sections of the dune system. Water continued to rise, creating instant lakes where desert had been minutes before. The entity's physical form began to break apart, segments separating as the connecting tissues dissolved. The sand constructs and hybrids throughout the area collapsed simultaneously, reverting to inert piles of ordinary sand and desiccated human remains. The transformed sand-coating buildings and roads returned to normal, the silicon organisms dying without the central intelligence to direct them. For nearly an hour, they watched the entity's death throes from their elevated position. The massive body continued to thrash, each movement weaker than the last, until finally it lay still, partially submerged in the newly formed lake. Then it began to sink, disappearing beneath the water's surface like a desert leviathan returning to the depths. "Is it dead?" Cole asked as the last chitinous segment vanished beneath the water. "The main body, yes," Vivian replied. "The neural core is destroyed. But something this ancient, this adaptive..." She left the thought unfinished. They descended from their rocky perch when it seemed safe, making their way carefully around the edge of the new lake system. The transformation of the landscape was complete. Where the dune system had stretched for miles, a series of saline lakes now gleamed in the setting sun. A military helicopter spotted them 2 hours later. Part of the emergency response mobilized when communications with Crestfall had failed. The survivors had made it to safety beyond the county line, including those Vivian and Cole had sent ahead on the school buses. In the days that followed, the government response was predictably overwhelming. The area was quarantined, official explanations involving a natural gas pocket rupturing beneath an unknown aquifer. Crestfall survivors were relocated, compensated, and subtly encouraged to discuss the incident as little as possible. 6 months later, the landscape around former Crestfall had stabilized. The lakes remained, their mineral content nearly identical to the Great Salt Lake in Utah, too saline for the silicon organisms to survive. The town itself was never rebuilt, the area designated as a natural preserve and placed under military jurisdiction. Vivian, now heading a classified research facility at the lake's edge, continued to study samples recovered from the entity's remains. The government had recognized the potential applications of the silicon organisms if they could be controlled, isolated from their hive intelligence. Their ability to transform organic matter had implications for everything, from medicine to materials science. "Anything interesting today?" Sheriff Cole asked, entering her laboratory. He had joined the security detail at the facility, unwilling to be far from the site of the entity's apparent demise. "Nothing conclusive," Vivian replied, removing her safety goggles. "The remaining organisms are dormant. Without the neural core, they're just exotic microbes." But she didn't entirely believe that. Occasionally, samples would show brief periods of activity, subtle, almost undetectable reorganization at the molecular level, as if remembering what they had once been part of, or perhaps receiving weak signals from something that still existed. The military maintained a constant presence around the lakes, monitoring for any signs of the entity's return. Regular chemical treatments ensured the water maintained its lethal salinity for any silicon organisms. Periodic sonar sweeps mapped the lake bottoms, watching for changes in the sunken remains. Life in the region adapted to the new reality. Tourism developed around the miracle lakes, their striking blue color against the desert landscape drawing photographers and nature enthusiasts. Few knew or remembered what had created them. On a bright autumn day, Vivian took a rare break from her research to walk along the shore of the largest lake. The water was calm, reflecting the cloudless sky like a perfect mirror. Children played nearby, building sand castles, while their parents picnicked under shade structures. One child, a girl of perhaps 6, called excitedly to her mother, "Mom, look what the sand does when no one's watching." Vivian froze, then slowly approached. The child was pointing to a small, perfect funnel in the sand, exactly like those she had first observed at the students' campsite over a year ago. "It makes little tornadoes all by itself," the girl explained, delighted by the discovery. As Vivian watched, the funnel collapsed, leaving no evidence of its existence. The sand appeared completely normal, ordinary silica without the oily sheen of the transformed dunes. But for a moment, just before the funnel had collapsed, Vivian could have sworn she felt the faintest vibration beneath her feet, and heard, just at the threshold of perception, the familiar humming that had once emanated from the dunes. "What an imagination you have," the girl's mother said indulgently, unaware of Vivian's sudden tension. Vivian said nothing, her scientific mind already formulating explanations: wind patterns, the child's own actions, natural settling of the sand. All perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical. Yet as she walked back toward the research facility, she couldn't help but recall Jack Harrison's warning from what seemed a lifetime ago. The hungry sands, he had called it. Been doing it for centuries. In the depths of the lakes, in pockets unreachable by the saline water, dormant silicon organisms waited in the darkness. Fragments of a consciousness that had existed for millennia, patient and adaptive. And on the shores of the new lakes, ordinary sand sometimes moved when no one was watching, forming tiny, perfect funnels that disappeared without a trace. The entity wasn't dead. It was merely changing, evolving, adapting, as it had done countless times before. And somewhere beneath the waters of what locals were now calling the drowned desert, something ancient and patient dreamed of the day it would rise again.